From the headquarters of the American Radio Relay League in Newington, Connecticut, this is ARRL Audio News for Friday, July 14th, 2017. This program is produced by the ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, and features news highlights compiled from the ARRL letter, found on the web at arrl.org. I'm Sean Kutzko, KX9X.
And I'm your co-host, Carla Pereira, KC1HSX.
In this week's report, FCC crackdowns on pirate broadcasters targets at least one more amateur licensee.
Amateur radio volunteers in British Columbia reported assisting relief agencies.
And K2BSA will be on the air during the National Scout Jamboree.
These stories and others, plus Bruce Page, KK5DO with this week's satellite update, all coming up now.
Hi, I'm ARRL member Randy Allen, KA0AZS of Moraine, Ohio, and you're listening to ARRL Audio News.
A recent flurry of FCC Enforcement Bureau correspondence to alleged unlicensed broadcasters has targeted at least one more radio amateur, this time in the greater New York City area. It's not the first time Winston Tulloch, KC2ALN of Paterson, New Jersey, has heard from the FCC, which has had Tulloch in its sights for at least several months regarding a pirate FM station. Last November, the Enforcement Bureau sent Tulloch a notice of unlicensed operation after FCC agents used direction-finding techniques to zero in on a signal on 90.9 megahertz coming from his residence. Tulloch was sent a second notice of unlicensed operation on June 8th after Enforcement Bureau agents from the FCC's New York office on May 2nd responded to a complaint of an unlicensed FM station operating on 90.9 megahertz in Paterson. This time, the signal was determined to be emanating from another residence about 1 mile from Tulloch's. The FCC said someone at the residence identified Tulloch as the station's operator. A third notice of unlicensed operation followed on June 30th after Enforcement Bureau agents followed up in the unlicensed FM station investigation in Paterson on June 12th, confirmed by direction-finding techniques that the signal on 90.9 megahertz was continuing to come from the same residence. FCC Enforcement Bureau Region 1 Director David Dombrowski has advised Tulloch 3 times now that the unlicensed radio operation on 90.9 megahertz must be discontinued immediately. The Commission's enforcement resources are already suffering from last year's closing of FCC field offices and the layoffs of field agents, however, and the administration has called for cutting the FCC's budget. In late May, the Enforcement Bureau also issued a notice of violation to Lyle Hilden, KD6LUL of Vista, California, alleging that he had engaged in pirate radio broadcasting on the FM band.
Radio Amateurs of Canada reported last weekend that it was monitoring the wildfire situation in British Columbia. Acting British Columbia Yukon Section Manager Bill Gibbs, VE7XS, advised RAC that amateur radio emergency service teams had not been called out and that the wildfire situation has not become a communications event. A state of emergency has been declared in Canada's westernmost province. More than 250 wildfires were reported active in British Columbia as of July 12th, and 21 of them are considered of note. Fires had spread over nearly 99,000 acres by midweek. There are amateurs on the ground helping other organizations such as the Red Cross, RAC reported. It's been estimated that more than 14,000 people have been evacuated from fire-stricken communities, many now in shelters, and an undetermined number of homes have been destroyed. Lightning is being blamed for most of the wildfires throughout the province. The last provincial declaration of state of emergency was issued in August 2003, also in response to wildfires.
The Pacific Islands Refugees and Monuments Office of the Fish and Wildlife Service has selected the Dateline DX Association, the de-expedition group that activated Howland Island in 2009 and Wake Island in 1998, to pursue a de-expedition to Baker Island. Dates have not yet been determined. Baker and Howland Islands, KH1, is the 4th most wanted DXCC entity on Club Log's DXCC Most Wanted list. The group will announce planned activation dates and other details once a vessel has been selected and the Fish and Wildlife Service has approved the vessel and dates. DDXA co-leaders are Don Greenbaum, N1DG, Tom Harrell, N4XP, and Kevin Rowett, K6TD. In early June, Fish and Wildlife Service agreed that a de-expedition to Baker Island would be an acceptable use of the Baker Island National Wildlife Refuge, but detailed strict conditions under which it would issue a special use permit to allow such a use. Earlier this year, FWS conducted a compatibility determination for amateur radio operation on the ecologically sensitive island refuge. Baker Island is approximately 1,800 nautical miles southwest of Honolulu, an 8-day voyage. A de-expedition to the refuge may last up to 14 days, with only 12 days of radio operation and allowing time for setup and breakdown on each end of the visit.
Online, via podcast, and on repeaters around the world, you're listening to ARRL Audio News.
Now, with this week's satellite update, here's Bruce Page, KK5DO.
We mentioned the slow scan TV on the ISS last week. Slow scan TV will start on July 20th around 21:25 UTC. Most of the world will have an opportunity to capture some of the images. This is the ARRL 20th anniversary, and you want to catch some of them yourself. If you happen to receive an image, you can share it on arrs-sstv.blogspot.com. Looking for a fun weekend? Visit Reno, Nevada for the annual AMSAT Space Symposium and General Meeting from October 27th through the 29th. This year it will be at the Silver Legacy Resort Hotel Casino. It is not too early to make your plans. The AMSAT Board of Directors will meet the 26th and 27th. More information can be found at amsat.org and click on the Events tab. Chad, KG0MW, is traveling around Canada and is going to be active in a lot of different grid squares from July 15th through July 23rd. He will be in EN41, EN58, EN63, EN77, and EN96. Check his Twitter page for updates on his location. It's at KG0MW. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO, for the ARRL Audio News.
The 5 CubeSats making up the Birds 1 constellation were deployed into orbit from the International Space Station, or ISS, on July 7th. Each carries an amateur radio payload but no transponders. The Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency module's remote manipulator arm was used to accomplish the launches. The Birds 1 constellation of 5 1-unit CubeSats are all of the same design and all use the same amateur radio frequency. They were launched to the ISS on June 3rd. The main mission of the 2-year project is to use the constellation to carry out radio communication experiments via a network of UHF and VHF amateur radio ground stations around the world. 4 faculty members and 15 students at Japan's Kyushu Institute of Technology, or QTech, are coordinating the experiment, with participation from student engineering teams at universities in Bangladesh, Ghana, Mongolia, Nigeria, Thailand, and Taiwan. The challenges will be to distinguish each CubeSat from its companion spacecraft transmitting on the same frequency, hand over operation of a satellite from one ground station to another, and assemble the satellite data, such as housekeeping telemetry and Earth images, obtained at different ground stations. Radio amateurs have been invited to join the network to assist in the data downlink and reconstruction of patchy satellite data into meaningful data. Orbit information and the operational plan of each satellite is to be made available to the amateur radio community, along with software to decode the satellite data. Amateur radio stations that successfully decode the telemetry data and Earth images will receive a QSL card from the Birds team. The reconstructed data will be posted. According to the IARU, the satellites have a coordinated downlink frequency of 437.375 megahertz.
APRS is the topic of the current episode of the ARRL The Doctor Is In podcast. Sponsored by DX Engineering, ARRL The Doctor Is In is an informative discussion of all things technical. Listen on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, whenever and wherever you like. Every 2 weeks, your host, QST Editor-in-Chief Steve Ford, WB8IMY, and the doctor himself, Joel Hallis, W1ZR, will discuss a broad range of technical topics. You can also email your questions to doctor@arrl.org, and the doctor may answer them in a future podcast. Enjoy ARRL The Doctor Is In on Apple iTunes or by using your iPhone or iPad podcast app. You can also listen online at Blueberry or at Stitcher and through the free Stitcher app for iOS, Kindle, or Android devices.
The resurrected 25 MHz signal of time and frequency standard station WWV is now emanating from a circularly polarized turnstile antenna. WWV had used a vertically polarized antenna on 25 MHz in the 1970s. Silent since 1977, the 25 MHz signal returned to the air on an experimental basis in April 2014, and it's been transmitting ever since. Initially on a broadband discone until August 2015, when it switched back to a vertical, which it used until the July 7 switch to circular polarization. We are broadcasting with 2 kilowatts from a circularly polarized turnstile antenna, WWV lead electrical engineer Matt Deutsch, N0RGT, told ARRL this week. When the 25 MHz transmitter was shut down in 1977, the antenna's radiating element was tossed in the boneyard and a new longer section put on the tower to make it a 15 MHz standby antenna, Deutsch has recounted. When WWV first reintroduced the 25 MHz broadcast some 37 years later in response to requests, it used a broadband monopole. But it was later decided to use that antenna for WWV's 2.5 MHz standby transmitter and to rebuild the 25 MHz antenna. The old radiating section was retrieved and the antenna rebuilt so that it looked like what was being used in 1977. Deutsch said it's hoped that the latest antenna change to circular polarization might be helpful to anyone studying propagation during next month's total solar eclipse, which will be visible across the U.S. My effort right now is focused on getting the word out, just to make people aware that the 25 MHz signal is available and it can be useful to them. Located in Fort Collins, Colorado, WWV is operated by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. WWV has invited listeners' comments and reports on its 25 MHz signal.
Hi, I'm ARRL member Zach Widup, W9SZ of Urbana, Illinois, and you're listening to ARRL Audio News.
And finally, the Boy Scouts of America station K2BSA will be on the air during the 2017 National Scout Jamboree, July 18th to July 28th, from the Summit Bechtel Scout Reserve in West Virginia. The K2BSA operation will demonstrate amateur radio to several thousand scouts and fulfill the radio merit badge requirement for QSOs. We need you on the other end of the contact, the BSA announcement said. All information for making a contact with K2BSA during the Jamboree is on the K2BSA website. It lists frequencies, repeaters, Echolink, and D-Star options. K2BSA will also publish live updates on Facebook and Twitter of active frequencies. K2BSA will host a nightly net at 2330 UTC on Echolink conference node Jambo, Jambo. You can also access the net via the repeaters at the summit. The Scout campers plan to launch at least one balloon from the Jamboree that are expected to navigate around the globe. Post-launch online tracking is available. The Jamboree logbook has information on how to request QSL cards. An amateur radio on the International Space Station or ARRS contact with an International Space Station crew member has been scheduled as well. Date and time is still pending.
That concludes ARRL Audio News for this week. Our thanks to all contributors to this week's report. ARRL Audio News is produced by the American Radio Relay League, the National Association for Amateur Radio. For more information on amateur radio or the ARRL, visit us on the web at arrl.org. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by searching for ARRL. If you have a question or comment about ARRL Audio News, email us at audionews@arrl.org. This program is copyright 2017, ARRL, all rights reserved. Until next week, I'm Carla Pereira, KC1HSX.
And I'm Sean Kutzko, KX9X73, and thanks for listening.